Okay, we're moving on to our last story. And this one is about Candace Owens and Donald Trump censorship. And we have to do a little bit of a test here, okay? We're going to put Candace to a little bit of a test. You know, Candace has been very vocal about free speech and about censorship. She was censored, obviously. She lost her job at the Daily Wire for attacking Israel. We all know that story. Won't have to go down that road again. But I want you to hear some of the things that she said about free speech and about Israel and about censorship. And then we need to ask a question. We need to ask a question about what is Candace going to do now when you look at the recent statement that Trump just made. Let's go ahead and get into this clip here. When Candace was on Piers, listen to what she said about the censorship in Israel. Listen.
Did you ever say or do anything which to a Jewish ear could be construed as anti-Semitic?
Well, let's be clear about all of these topics, whether we're talking about racism, sexism, anti-Semitism. Everything can be construed to an ear when you're talking about a subjective ear that I believe that this is racist. I mean, I could say, hey, Piers, you even asking me questions. And to me, it feels racist, right? A feeling and a fact are two different things. So what someone construes something is meaningless. Factually speaking, I have never said anything that is anti-Semitic. And had I have said something that was anti-Semitic, Andrew Klavan would have simply showed the clip.
Right. A lot of attention has been focused on you constantly referencing Christ is King. Many people believing that although those words in themselves, if you're a Christian, as you are, would not be offensive, that to Jewish people, when they're being whipped up on social media, as they were at the time, by people who are genuine white supremacists and pretty brazen anti-Semites, that being smart as you are, you would have known that to deliberately use that phrase repeatedly in that time, in that climate, was a deliberate act of provocation to people like Ben Shapiro, who obviously are extremely high-profile Jewish people. Do you accept that?
I'm sorry, which time frame are you talking about when you say at that time?
Well, since the start of the Israel-Hamas war.
Yeah, no. So that phrase, if you're talking about when it began to be a scandal, because I think everyone was quite confused when there was suddenly this narrative that it could be construed as anti-Semitic, which is why it required so much explaining by people of when it became anti-Semitic. I posted a standalone Bible verse, this is just a pure fact, calling for peace. And at the end of the verse, I ended it and said, Christ is King, last November. Andrew Klavan references that. The reason why this even became a scandal is because of Andrew Klavan. Andrew Klavan did an episode called Because Christ is Really King. And then he accused me wrongly of spitting that phrase at a Jew. That simply never happened, as I showed in my first episode back. It was just made that up out of thin air. I posted a standalone Bible verse and I wrote at the end of it, Christ is King. And then a Jew responded to me telling me to quit my job. So what happens sometimes is then time passes and people try to rewrite history, but we're not going to do revisionist history here. I tweeted Christ is King appropriately following a Bible verse when I was 38 weeks pregnant. And I stand by that proverb and I stand by my declaring Christ to be King as I have done many times in the past.
2 things.
So this was one of the examples where I did feel like this was blown way out of proportion, not just by Piers Morgan, but by other people on Twitter as well. Listen, I've heard people say that phrase as someone who did grow up in the church. I heard people say that phrase like when I was in church. So if for those of us that are Christian, you know, it is not unfamiliar to us. But that was an example that was used against Candace Owens, where it seems like it started with the Daily Wire, where they were trying to say that, you know, she was anti-Semitic because she made that statement, right? So this is a free speech issue. This is a censorship issue, right? This is something that, you know, is in the Bible. So that brings up the question of the Bible and how do Christians feel about this as well? These are questions people need to ask, you know. I haven't been to church in a hot minute, but these are questions that people do need to start thinking about. Like, how far is this going to go? Especially those of you that are religious and you do still attend church and you read the Bible. So think about that. That's one example, right? So she was heavily attacked during that time. I think we all remember this. And I want to show you something else as well. This was her calling out censorship and how censorship is used, right, when they are losing an argument. Listen to this. She's using it to define, she's describing the left, but she's correct about how people use censorship when they realize they're losing the argument. So it's like, let's silence that person, right? So listen to this.
Censorship is an indication that they're losing. When you have to start requiring fact checkers, when you have to start trying to encourage people to pull content offline and calling everything hate speech, it's because you know that you're no longer winning the argument. So as just one example, when Barack Obama was in office, we never had fact checkers. We never were told that the internet is not a safe place. We never had safe spaces. And the reason for that is because when Barack Obama was in office, the left was winning, right? The liberals were winning. I was a person that was convinced that they were telling the truth. I cried the night Barack Obama won, like thinking that this was an amazing feat because the media sold that to me. I think they sold to a lot of people. They sold that idea that Barack Obama was going to be the end of all racial strife, right, in this country. And yet it actually manifested a beginning of racial strife from the time that I was a child, right? I had never seen anything like it. Censorship.
Okay, so we can talk about the Obama stuff at another part, but the point that she made there about censorship, right? How it can be used when the side that is trying to censor you is losing the argument, right? So we couldn't say that happened to her with the Daily Wire. You know, they're like, oh, we got to get rid of you. We got to fire you, that kind of thing. We can say that was that thing with them, and also, you know, Piers Morgan and all these other people. And I don't agree with a lot of the things that Candace Owens says, but when it came to the Israel issue, the fact that you can't even criticize what Israel is doing without being smeared as anti-Semitic is ridiculous. So the level of censorship and the lack of free speech that we have in this country is a real issue, especially around Israel and Gaza. Here she is again. Recently, she tweeted this: the left was calling for censorship of the truth without any due process, with the aim of forcing their sick narratives upon the public. Hope this helps. She's referring to this comment here from Ed Krasenstein, which, by the way, the Krasenstein brothers, the twins, they're terrible. But what she said was, you cannot be this dense. You have a right to say whatever you want, but you can face legal consequences if you commit libel with malicious intent. Anyone perpetuating to be a professional journalist should have learned this in undergrad. So she has a point there, and she's referring to Ed tweeting this: President Trump is suing media outlets for $10 billion, accusing them of bias, right? So she responded and said the left was calling for censorship of the truth without any due process. Okay. So all of that being said, here's my question. This recent statement here from Donald Trump, how does Candace Owens feel about this when it comes to free speech and censorship?
And here's what I will do to defeat anti-Semitism and defend our Jewish citizens in America. My first week back in the Oval Office, my administration will inform every college president that if you do not end anti-Semitic propaganda, they will lose their accreditation and federal taxpayer support. Thank you. Truth is, you don't have to do much after that. When you do that, it's going to work miracles. Please sit down. We will not subsidize the creation of terrorist sympathizers, and we're not going to do it certainly on American soil. We're not going to do it anywhere. Next, I will inform every educational institution in our land that if they permit violence, harassment, or threats against Jewish students, the schools will be held accountable for violations of the civil rights law.
So everybody listen to what's said here, right? I don't hear this in reference to any other groups, right? Everybody see what's happening? By the way, this was happening. Don't get it twisted. Don't think that this would not be a thing under Kamala Harris either, because Kamala Harris was criticizing and attacking, and she was smearing those campus protesters as anti-Semitic as well. I read her statement right on this show. You would have gotten the same thing from both. So what will be considered hate speech / anti-Semitic on the university campuses that's basically criticizing Israel? Now, they told the kids not to say from the river to the sea. Okay. Now I see videos and stories of students threatening to get deported because they attended a pro-Palestinian protest. I have seen, again, this is all under the Biden-Harris administration. Trump's not in office yet. These are the things you're not hearing about. The other things that they're doing to those students. So people wonder why you don't see the campus protest anymore, because the universities have been ordered by Congress to crack that down. That's why you don't see them out there anymore with the tents and all that stuff. So keep that in mind. But listen to this again. Pay attention to what is said.
That if they permit violence, harassment, or threats against Jewish students, the schools will be held accountable for violations of the civil rights law. Very important. Jewish Americans must have equal protection under the law. They're going to get it. At the same time, my administration will move swiftly to restore safety for Jewish students and Jewish people on American streets.
So here's my question for Candace Owens. Is Candace Owens going to say anything about that? Is Candace Owens going to say anything about censorship and free speech in reference to Trump's statement about those college campuses? Is Candace Owens going to point her finger at Donald Trump and say, how dare you infringe upon free speech rights? Now, remember, under Biden-Harris, she came forward and she said, those kids have the right to protest. They have the right to do that. Is Candace Owens going to say that under Donald Trump? Is Candace Owens going to play this video on her show and say the same thing that she said to Biden and Harris? Is she going to say that about Donald Trump as well? What happened to free speech? What happened to what about the censorship? Because you see, I'm noticing something. I know all of you are not on Twitter, but here's something I've noticed on Twitter. It seems like to me, some of the people that have been, pro-Palestinian, that have called out the censorship, that are very much pro-free speech, they're not talking right now. They're not saying anything about this video. It's not just her. I mean, we look on Twitter. People are asking, Dave Smith, where are you at? Where's all these people? So all those attacks that Candace Owens received about criticizing Israel, about her right to free speech, about censorship, is she going to say anything about what Trump just said he's going to do? Let's take a look, because there's more to this. Now we can go to it. Look, right now, if you go to Candace's channel, so far, I don't see it. I don't see it, bud. There's Mark Lamont Hill. There's Beyonce was paid $10 million. There's the appointments of Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk. There's Melania. And then we get back to 8 days ago. This video is new. I don't see it. We can look at videos. Let's just be sure, because I checked this earlier today. I don't see it, bud. Former CIA officer, Kamala Chronicles, Kamala, Neil Oliver, and that's a month ago. I don't see anything about the free speech. Where is the attack and criticism about Donald Trump going after free speech? Be consistent. We said the same thing to Dave Smith online. We said the same thing. By the way, where is the criticism of this? So we talked about Elise Stefanik, right? Now, I covered Donald Trump appointments on here. She covered some of them. Why hasn't Candace Owens said anything about Elise Stefanik being appointed as the UN ambassador? Why hasn't she said anything about this woman who is not just pro-Israel? This is the woman who went after the college university presidents. That's why they don't have a job. That's the congresswoman who did that. She's the one who wants to conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, which, by the way, Twitch has now changed their user guidelines, and their new user guideline says that Zionism is now hate speech. This is all still under Biden-Harris. But again, to the point, why hasn't she said, look at this. This is from Shabazz. During my first congressional testimony, Elise Stefanik pulled me aside and gave me her contact info. Listen to this. If the Harvard Jewish community is ever in trouble, call me. Here is a congresswoman telling these students that if they ever feel they're in trouble, and that could be whatever, that could be someone just simply criticizing Benjamin Netanyahu. You see how far this goes? She tells them to call her. Elise Stefanik. Why isn't Candace Owens saying anything? You don't see Elise Stefanik doing this for Black students, Indigenous students, Latino students? What the hell is going on here? But see, when other groups try to do this for their group, it's called racism, reverse racism. It's called DEI. But it's okay to do that. People got to pay attention to what's going on. Why hasn't Candace Owens said anything about this woman, Elise Stefanik? Just to remind you of who she is. Listen.
Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
I will ask you one more time. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric.
And is it anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
That woman lost her job. Claudine Gay lost her job. This woman, she was the one who came after the university presidents. And I'm not here to simp for academics, but you have to pay attention to what has happened. So for all the people who supported Donald Trump, why didn't any of these people say anything about Elise Stefanik? Why? Because she's a part of the party. This is the problem with partisan politics. People are more likely to defend their party even when they're in the wrong. So I'm noticing that now that there are more statements that Donald Trump is saying about Israel, Gaza, etc., none of those people criticized him for saying those things because he's a part of their party. Just like Democrats didn't want to really criticize Kamala Harris or Joe Biden for the things that they said. The same Democrats that said, we got to look out for Gaza, they were yelling at the protesters and yelling at people like me who didn't want to support Kamala Harris instead of yelling at Kamala Harris, who told those kids, I'm speaking. It's a cult. And it's one thing. You can like a podcaster. You can like a personality, but don't ever let it get to the point where you can't hold them accountable. Don't ever let it get to the point where you see they're not being consistent and you don't say anything because you like them. One of the good things about doing this show and doing the call in after the show is I actually get to talk to you guys. I actually get to hear your voices. I'm not just talking to you in the chat. And you tell me if you like something. You tell me if you don't like something I did. You tell me if you like something I did do. But either way, you get to talk to me. So the question again, because we talking about the games that people play. Is it really about the party? Or is it really about free speech and censorship? Because if it is about free speech and censorship, then Candace should hold Donald Trump accountable as well. But I don't think she's going to because he's in her party. Partisan politics is a fucking problem. And everybody needs to call it out. I don't care if you like me, if you hate me. I am not going to sit up here and pretend like I don't see what's happening. And I know some of you see it too. You can't go around all year going on all these different shows talking about Israel came after me and all this. And what about free speech? What about censorship? Protect my rights and all this jazz. And when Trump wants to do censorship, you have nothing to say. Fuck that. And it points to something else that I said before. Both parties support censorship, just on different issues. The one issue that they have in common when it comes to censorship is Israel. Both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party support censorship when it comes to Israel. But both parties support censorship. Ask her. Those of you that watch Candace, I have no contact with Candace. Don't know how to contact her. I have no contact. I would ask her this myself. Is she going to hold Trump accountable for censorship? Just a question. Ask her. The next time you watch her show, those of you who do have contact with her, ask her. Say, Candace, are you going to talk about Trump trying to censor the colleges over Israel? Ask. And if you're afraid to ask, you need to ask yourself why. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.